Jim Coulter, born in Perth in 1922, 100, and so far so good. My father, John McRae Coulter, was the first person to show motion pictures in Western Australia. So, free movies every Friday night, not every Saturday night. His first cinema was the Capitol Theatre. That was an independent that Dad and another person launched. It was, Depression years, and so instead of getting usherettes, he got ushers. And something like 3,000 or 5,000 lined up and went round, and Dad said, every one of you will be interviewed and you'll all have an equal chance. There are 30 jobs. But that was a picture of the depression for me. Theatre managers and bookmakers, I think, were the ones that were never broke because people had to have a turn up. I was dolled up like, clothes and shoes and so on. In the school photos, you see quite a lot of them without shoes. My mother, I have very fond memories, but I was 7 when she died. Pleurisy and pneumonia, no antibiotics in those days. So there came what they call the crisis, and you either got through or you didn't, and she didn't, So a little bit later, Rose came onto the scene. They married and she became my stepmother. We were both competing for Dad's affections, and also she came from a pretty tough background, and I had been described as a smart aleck rather, and so, we were sort of just not a natural mix. But eventually she finished up a very dear friend. That's another story. I went away for a school camp, and some people came who said that they were from Moral Re-Armament. Moral Re-Armament, I said. What sort of morals? They said like absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness and love. I said, gee, I think I'm living the opposite to all 4 of them. Where'd you get them? And they told me they came from the Sermon on the Mount. Now there's a Mount Street in Perth, so I said, which church in Mount Street was it? They were kindly, they said, no, it was given abroad actually, Jim, some time ago, but you can find it in Matthew 5, 6 and 7. I'd never opened the Bible before. I did. I read down to where it said, if you looked at a woman to lust after you already committed the act in your heart. Well, I said, that's absolute purity, and shut the Bible. That was the start of an adventure. Frank Buchman was the man who initiated Moral Re-Armament, and he didn't set about to create a movement, but he set about creating change in the next person you met and passing it on, and it became much more than that. And the object of it was very simple, that if you want to change the world, you need to change human nature. And the place to start is with yourself.
Every man, every woman, every child in Holland under God's control. Holland, a miracle among the nation.
I apologised to Rose's daughter for treating her badly because I didn't like her mother. And then she decided she'd try and do something about her life, so she apologised to her mother for never doing any housework. The next thing I knew was Dad said, Rose had this amazing talk with Vilma, her daughter, and she doesn't care what you call what you found, but she wants to know more about it. So it led to a transformation in Rose's life. And Dad, who'd brought me and my brother up as complete pagans, finished up getting a faith through Rose, so it was quite remarkable in the end. In Perth, I went to the North Perth State School because Dad had heard they were the best ones at getting scholarships, and they were successful enough to even succeed with me. So I then went to Perth Bond School, and Rita, who little did I know, but was to become my wife, she became the head girl, so she was the ideal student, and I was a bit more involved with sport and such things. So I got a job in the West Australian. I did the paper at night when I was going to school, and then the war came along and nobody was talking about what they were going to do after the war, or when they left school it was, going to the Army, Navy or the Air Force. So I volunteered for the Air Force, and then I was sent to Britain. I finished up being posted to Coastal Command, flying from Pembroke Dock, and was a pilot on Sunderland flying boat. Australian flying boat squadron one was number 10, and then out of that they made another one, 461. So that was our squadron, so we were basically all Australians. We flew at night, 25 tonnes, crew of 12. 8 depth charges, flew 15 hours at a time to sink submarines if we found them. Theory was that we had the latest radar, and we could actually see them at night, which they didn't know about at that time. But we stopped sinking submarines because we couldn't find them. During this time, I met Polish flyers who said to me, "You'll win your war and we'll lose our country." And I said, "Don't be cynical to me. I gave up my job in Perth to come over and try and free your country, and so did thousands of Australians, and then come that." And they said, "Well, you're a nice young man, but you don't understand history or ideology." And of course, I realised later that they knew what they were talking about. We had a Air Marshal come down to give us his Upguards at Atom speech, and he tells us we'll be flying in support of D-Day, and we expect 50% casualties. But I want you to know, for every one of you that dies, there would be hundreds of sailors' lives have been saved, and thousands of the troops. Do you think we cared about them guys? Half the squadron went out and got drunk that night. Yes, and of course, like all these prophecies never happened because all the planes that were supposed to shoot us down moved to D-Day, and so we had no casualties at all. I had a very fortunate war. This was the Legion d'Honneur, which was given to me for taking part in D-Day. 70 years later, the French government gave me a Legion d'Honneur for my part in D-Day. I think really the French had a terrible history pre-war. They kept on changing governments and corruption and so on. France had to start again at the end of the war, and really this Legion d'Honneur was really to show what they'd done with the chance they were given by the war. I'm very grateful to have it. The day after the war finished, I circled an island off France, and all the kids went in, and when they found out we were goodies, they came out with tricolors that they'd made to celebrate the end of the war and wave the flags. And we, in this 25-ton flying boat at about 100 feet, we circled them for about 20 minutes. And there were some real toughies in our crew, and I don't think there was a single one that was dry-eyed, because this is what we were supposed to be doing. The European war had just finished, but we were not at all happy with the thought of going out and fighting the Japanese. And, we all sorts of strange things. People sort of, they're going to use Sunderland as dive bombers over there. People have written philosophical statements about the dropping of the atom bombs and everything, but as far as we were concerned, it finished the war, and where we were relieved. I don't remember, for myself or anybody else, going through all the moral pros and cons. No. It's all the real bits are so real you don't really want to go back to them. And many people, in my experience, are damaged psychologically and not the people they were when they went. And so it's stripped bare. You want to put a lot of effort into seeing it doesn't happen again, rather than spending a great deal of time reminiscing about the past. First day I got back, I met Ben Chifley. I gave him a colossal lecture what Australia should do, and had all these riches and everything. It wasn't just about to be for us and so on. So then I said, excuse me, I've given you a bit of a lecture, but it's what's been going on in my mind, because I've been wondering if I should actually resign my job and do something about it. And he pulled a pipe out of his mouth and said, if I were you, young fellow, I'd back your hunch and give it a go. And I'd met Curtin in London during the war, and I felt both those men cared for me more than I cared for them. And I had a strange thought, who cares for the people who are in leadership positions? So I felt I heard a voice saying, you're meant to. Yeah. In the meantime, I'd found a faith. I actually resigned my job on the paper, and I went across to Europe and helped, so did Rita, help create a centre where people could come who were in the war and so on, run by Moral Re-Armament, and which I'd heard about at school. Frank Buchman, I met him when I coming back from the war, and I made it clear to him that I and the man that I was travelling with, whose name was Gordon Wise, that really we were bits of talent that were available when the war had finished. We didn't really know what we were going to do, and we wanted to do something in the world. And I thought he'd gobble us up, and he, not once but twice, let my purple prose flow by without picking it up in a bit. And then I later thought about it, and I thought, he wants me to get my call from God, and not, he used to say that Moral Re-Armament wasn't his, it was God's. And so this was an example of it, you see. And so in the end, Gordon and I both did get a call. One thing led to another, and so Rita and I were invited to go to Switzerland, where they were getting a very big conference centre to get all the people, particularly that have been fighting one another together. So we actually did that for 5 or 6 or 7 years. The Army of Occupation sent 300 from Germany, another 400 or so from France. But Rita and I were often the host and hostess of a table where there was another another two couples. And one was from France and one from Germany, and we never found one of those that had ever met somebody from the other country. They'd been for 200 or 300 years, they'd been fighting, so when you actually got down to it, they'd never met in an ordinary way.
We Australians have imperishable traditions. We shall maintain them. We shall vindicate them. We shall hold this country and keep it as a citadel for the British-speaking race.
When we fought and changed the White Australia policy, which was an issue that I, with other people, put a lot of effort into, and we said to our cabinet that our immigration policy should be based on character, not colour. And so I was sent off to the war, and every person that went abroad, 20,000 or whatever it was, 50,000, they're all given the same message. You're meant to tell everybody that you come from a country that is 98.6% of Anglo-Celtic background. So we never ever used that phrase, but that was the official line. And Malcom Fraser, I knew him, and I said to him that I had these two guests coming to Australia. One was Rajman Gandhi, who was the grandson of the Mahatma, and the other one was Madame Law, who was one of the French resistance leaders and had done a great deal through the conferences that we'd had in Switzerland to bring both France and Germany together. And they were coming out over the Christmas period, and he said, "Well, that's a pity, there'll be nobody in their offices." But I said, "Well, yeah, but they'd be in their homes, wouldn't they?" So he said, "Oh yes, I suppose so." So I said, "Could I bring them down to Noreen, which was his property?" "Oh yeah, yes," he said. So I was a little bit cheeky, but anyway, Malcolm's mother was very conservative, and she started speaking about how I think everybody would agree that the basic problems of the world came from the socialists. So I felt my moment had come. So I said, "Look, I think you should know that the lady sitting on the couch with you was the secretary of the Socialist Women of France." And Tammy then comes in and says, "Yes, and I suppose you're all socialists." Like, who gives a damn? And then Malcolm brought it back to order, and he said, "What do they feel about us in Asia now the White Australia policy is gone?" Malcolm, he was many different people, and there was a lot of, he had a tremendous feeling for the Aboriginal people, for instance. And then I find out from Tammy that he had a terribly isolated growing up in a very backwards property and so on. And the only two friends he had were two Aboriginal boys, you see. And I very often felt that there was another person entirely that was much more worthy than the one that was put about. He and John Curtin had a great falling out, and Malcom Fraser resigned from the cabinet, but also brought him down as Prime Minister. And I saw him and said, "Look, I really feel that both of you are great people. I think that you're divided this way is a tragedy for the country," and so on. So then he told me what he'd said in Parliament, and I said, "But did you say that all to him before you said it in Parliament?" So he said, "Yes." I said, "Including the last sentence." The last sentence was, "This man is not fit to be Prime Minister of Australia." So he said, no, I didn't say that. Do you think I should apologise? So I said, well, I don't know, but I'm sure God does. So I've never known whether he did or he didn't. We got engaged to be married the night before I went abroad for 2 years' service in Britain. Her father wasn't very keen on the idea because he'd gone through the First World War as a teenager, and there were so many young men who got engaged or got married as they left who never came back. That's on my right-hand side, that's Philip, our oldest son. Then there's Rita in the middle and Gordon flanking her. Well, we told one another everything there was to know about each other. We had a sense of humour, which I think helped us to laugh sometimes, otherwise we might have gone the other way. She said to me long before she died, met at 16, here we are 100. That's a very long journey, very long journey. And I don't think we're the type. Never told me what the type was. I think she felt we were still young at heart.